Hi everyone, this is Dr. Vishal Sharma, who is principal at Metanoia Inc. and I'm moderator of the Carrier Ethernet group. And I'm delighted this afternoon to have with me Amy Copley, who's Director of Service Provider Solutions Marketing at BTI Systems. And so Amy, welcome to the Hangout, and thanks so much for doing this with us.
Thank you, nice to be here.
All right, guys. So, Amy and I had a chance to meet in person and had a great conversation at NFV World Congress and just last week in San Jose. And as we were talking, we realized that there's some very interesting things that BTI is doing with emerging service providers. And emerging service providers are, of course, a great subject of interest to all of us in the Carrier Ethernet group. And the workshop that's coming up June 8th in Chicago as part of Light Reading's BTE event. So we thought it'll be great to get together on a Google Hangout and spend a little bit of time kind of talking about what is happening in the emerging service provider world. I know Amy and her team, you all work a lot with that segment of our industry. So we thought we'll talk to Amy and understand a little bit about what's going on in that space, what kind of solutions are being sort of worked on, and what are some of the challenges as a preview to the much deeper discussions we're going to have at the actual workshop. So Amy, welcome again. And let me kick it off perhaps by giving you a couple of minutes to maybe just tell us a little bit about your background and sort of your role at BTI, and then we'll dive into the actual sort of discussions that we've been talking about.
Sure. So as the Director of Solutions for BTI in the service provider space, what my primary role is to look at the service provider marketing area and come up with, to help both the salespeople and the customers understand what we present as a packet optical company. So we provide metro Ethernet solutions as part of what the seminar is all about. We also do traditional WDM and in the metro space. So it's a packet optical platform. My background, I come from a number of companies that were primarily focused on the service provider space.
Sure.
Most recently from Cisco, I worked at Ericsson. Before that, Sycamore Networks, and also way back, go to Wellfleet Communications. So from the packet world, the router space, and all focused on carrier, both in optical and in now this metro Ethernet space.
Fantastic, fantastic. And yeah, Wellfleet is one of those pioneering companies that among others got many things started. So yeah, there's a great pedigree of people from Wellfleet ending up in all kinds of interesting companies. So as I said, today we want to talk about service providers. And so Amy, let's kick it off by asking, your sort of opinion on what are some of the challenges that you're seeing in the small and, emerging service provider space right now? And what are the things these providers are trying to address? And what generally are you seeing in this marketplace?
Well, certainly it would not be different between the smaller and larger operators. There's really a need for the large amounts of data. So data revenues are flat, if not declining some, but they also have a real need for expansion. So you have 4G services and 3G services, even the smaller operators providing, whether it's wavelength services or providing mobile backhaul to the larger operators, because they may have a geographic location that some of the bigger operators don't reach. So that's certainly something. And much like the larger service providers, you have a need for, you want quality services, you want your expectation for the demand that you'd be able to flexibly move your bandwidth around quickly, because the big carriers may come to you and want to do what they call success-based. You get the contract and they want it up and active directly. So things need to be very dynamic and fluid, and you need to be able to now, for the operator, to say, how are we going to get more money out of these wavelengths that we may already have, dark fiber or infrastructure that we have, with a small operating staff. So those probably are the largest ones that they're facing today.
So that's interesting, because in a sense, they're a microcosm of some of the challenges that the large operators are facing. But I think in addition, one of the things unique to the smaller guys is that they do not have necessarily all the resources that the larger operators have to throw at the problem, both in terms of staff maybe, and even sort of the investment budgets. Yet technologically, they're facing similar issues. So they have to actually look at much smarter solutions and maybe doing things in a more effective manner than even some of the big guys might.
That's correct. As they transition, they get rid of the POTS lines, the plain old telephone service. They may have DSL, they may have copper, they may have cable, and still have twisted pair networks that they need to bring in. So the access technologies that the smaller operators are dealing with, they may still need the TDM services, but they know that there's the migration to move those things to VoIP, voice over IP. They certainly need to expand their fiber footprint. They would like to do that, but they need a flexible solution that lets them have this SONET, the SDH, if they're outside of North America. So SONET or SDH or TDM services, as well as the newer class of services, and being able to make use of their fiber that they may have in the ground or the newer investments. If they look at the Universal Service Fund, perhaps they're getting some money to help them move along with that migration. That's certainly a very interesting place that they can look to get some funding. And some other places, they may have the utility in the area. They may also be looking to have fiber rights of way, where they might sell some service that the providers could go and make partnerships with. So there would be co-ops that they could join, a group of smaller operators get together and have larger purchasing power, but also have adjacent physical geographies, so they could go in and offer services to a broader area and therefore expand the market that some of these new services that they might be able to sell to.
Actually, that's an important point. I think it's worth maybe emphasizing that. I mean, outside of the rural operator co-op community, it's not maybe even that well known. I mean, I've talked to people and you tell them, well, we have well over, NTCA has 900 members, and people are surprised. So there's, all the way from small mom and pops to, operators running, 5 people running the company, to companies that can have, hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue all in the same breath. I mean, CenturyLink is a member of NTCA, but people know CenturyLink, but they don't know, the hundreds of other operators that are there, anywhere from $10 million to several $100 million in revenue, and they're doing these things. So I think that's an important thing to kind of point out. And then the other thing you mentioned is the rural co-ops, and of course we have a lot of those, all across the country, at least in the US, where the smaller operators have kind of congregated together, and they're presenting a common front in terms of vendor acquisition, and maybe even planning services and so forth.
That's true. It's interesting that they're able to do that, as the larger operator may not think about it when they're flying over, say, in between what they call the NFL cities that are large enough to have a football team. They forget that there are many, many, many rural operators there that have wonderful service areas, and those get together and can offer a broad range of services to their own customer base. So you think of a rural operator that may be able to connect. Are there geological infrastructures that they could connect? Are they doing any kind of satellite surveying systems? Because they're out regionally, out remotely, they might have a really great spot for a telescope to do research or be able to look up to satellite communications. So just because they don't necessarily see it in a very compact metro area doesn't mean that there are a lot of very rich business services that could be offered to those communities.
Sure. So we talked a little bit about we talked about, of course, the challenges that the smaller operators are facing, and we discussed that they're essentially facing similar challenges with big guys, but they have staff issues and cost and budgetary issues. They also, I think I realized as you were speaking, that they're also maybe, they have in some cases a much wider variety of access technologies going back, to the old days, if you will, where they're looking at POTS line and SONET and so on, where some of, at least in the emerging markets, the bigger operators have kind of gotten, evolved from that, and they're not looking at such a wide variety of access technologies in many sort of NFL markets, if you will. So that's the other challenge, that you need to be still working with a wide variety of technologies. So you need gear that allows you to do that. You need the ability in that software to allow you to do that. And so besides that, and then of course there's the changing market dynamics as well. Is there anything else that you think that is contributing to challenge? I don't know if is the FCC rulings recently. I don't know if they work in the favor of the small guys, or it keeps them at the status quo. Is there a thought on that?
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see where that comes to play. Certainly for the larger operators that had the ruling where they didn't want Comcast and Time Warner to merge, for example. That certainly affects the broader market, but I think there might be some differences that once it starts to play out underneath, that perhaps the smaller operators may feel like now our marketing may have an impact because we're able to keep the playing field level. So I think there are certainly some, remains to be seen what the impact of that will be. But I think very interesting application there that you have.
So they got to be, at least they got to be conscious and looking at, you know, looking at the marketplace. So that's the other thing that I think has changed for small operators. Even though they may be operating in a local area, they really do need to be very aware, much more so than maybe 10 years ago, of what's going on in the world outside, you know, both in terms of technology, in terms of regulation, and in terms of, you know, how the marketplace dynamics is playing out.
That's true. So I think when they look at this, there's a lot of challenges, but I think there are certainly some great opportunities that are brought because of this, that they're able to do some very interesting things because they'll get rural service fund, the universal service fund money, but they'll also be able to perhaps skip some of the steps. They may have some copper or older fiber technology that they may get to upgrade, and so they might in fact leapfrog some of the medium-sized operators. So you never know, there might be opportunity in some of that challenge.
Great, great. So let's segue then. This is a perfect segue into kind of what BTI Systems does in this space. You know, we know BTI serves kind of two major markets. One is sort of the bigger cloud providers, but the other very important market is the emerging operator space. So maybe it'll be great to understand a little bit about how BTI is, you know, helping some of these emerging operators meet the challenges that they're facing, and what is BTI doing in that space and how.
So we're on, we have a metro optical platform. So it's a packet optical combination and does things, for example, the lower speed line services if you need subrate services. So it's able to do SONET, SDH, you're able to take in the older TDM type services, whether it's copper or fiber. And then certainly all the way up to where you do 1 gig, 10 gig, and 100 gig platforms. So it's a broad variety of applications that are supported directly in there. And we have a pretty good service space to offer. So the types of customers that we have are, again, a range of companies that work in the cloud exchange market. For example, we have two fairly distinct marketplaces. The one I focus on is service provider. So somebody like a CBeyond or Rogers Communications, Singtel, TELUS, C-Spire, those type of companies. CTS as a company that's part of your session. We also have the space that we call the content co-location provider space, and those are people like Rackspace, Equinix, Interaction. Those are the types of companies that we do. So we have a view of both. My focus is really primarily on the service.
So when we left off, I was just asking you that, you know, BTI serves two markets, and you mentioned that you of course focus on the service provider space, and I was wondering, you know, what combination of BTI technologies are some of the service providers using? I know you have some. You have, of course, the packet-optical platforms. You have the sort of wavelength platforms. So it'd be interesting to see, hear a little bit about, you know, what kind of combination of technologies are the operators using as they try to evolve their networks into the more modern era, if you will.
So probably the more interesting applications, you can do the combination where this session is focusing on carrier Ethernet. You could have your carrier Ethernet applications to do things like Ethernet business services. You could do private line or virtual private line. So those type of traditional carrier Ethernet services. But what's also interesting are things where you have fiber, and because you'd be able to look at that fiber in a more granular fashion, you'd actually be able to peel off parts of bandwidth and do things, for example, an alien wave. We are actually able to take out a portion of that and sell that as separate fiber services for communication links between two companies or between two different service providers. So you're providing backbone, so you're getting more bandwidth out of your actual fiber technology that you're using. So things like where you're using muxponders, or you're able to peel off where you have a fiber that's going through, rather than doing OEO, you can peel off portions of that. Broadband aggregation, so you're bringing in 1 gig to 10 gig to 100 gig if you're, depending on how big you get. I think smaller operators wouldn't necessarily have lots of 100, but they certainly would have lots of 1 into 10s, and perhaps a number of 10s that they could then break off bits of that bandwidth to actually get more communication links to take advantage and make more use of that fiber.
Actually, it's interesting you mentioned about peeling off fiber and being able to peel off wavelengths, because that allows the opportunity for smaller operators essentially to serve as a as a carrier for operators in adjacent areas. So I'm aware of, and you can maybe can ratify if this is in fact true, that some of the operators have figured out that they got to collaborate, and there is a way to make idle capacity available to their in quotes competition, but there's no harm in doing that because they're not using it anyways. And something like what you just described, that splitting the wavelength off capability would be ideal to do something like that, where I can split off a wavelength at some off hours or whenever, or have some agreement, or even permanently, to some of my so-called competitors who are using me as a backhaul, as a transit to get to other geographies. And we are when we are especially in certain localities, like we're in a couple counties or whatever, and now you have connectivity which normally you would have taken through a big operator, but now you can take it through one of your partner operators, if you will. And I don't know if there's a lot of this happening, but certainly seems to be one way for operators to smaller operators to collaborate and cooperate.
Very much so. That with using that muxponder type technology, you're actually able to take that bandwidth rather than just being one large DWDM, but you're able to portion off bits of that to various interconnections. So you may provide fiber connectivity, purely point-to-point fiber applications. You may also do point-to-multipoint applications, and that's something where the carrier Ethernet technology can come in, because you can offer 2 service providers with an E and an I, an Ethernet network-to-network interface. So now you as an operator can connect to another operator, and you're going to exchange very specific information so that the end customer has a common experience across multiple carrier networks. They don't know that they're traversing multiple carrier networks. It looks the same to them, but you and your partner operator have an exchange of information at that network-to-network interface that's done, so you can in fact broaden the territory that you're able to offer those services to.
That's fantastic. And I wanted to mention one new development that's happening at the MEF, where they're talking about service operator interconnects. And in particular, there's an initiative that the MEF has launched where they've made it possible for smaller operators to participate in this service operator interconnect initiative, and even participate in some kind of interoperability and testing of services that they have not traditionally done. So I think there's a lot of recognition in bodies like the MEF that the new operators, the emerging and forward-thinking operators, need to be brought into the more formalized MEF services. And I think this is one way to make that happen. And of course, the technology comes from the likes of BTI. So that's great. So one of the benefits that operators have, you've clearly articulated, is that they can now offer a whole new class of services, and they can get into spaces like this backhauling or wholesaling, which they wouldn't traditionally have done at all, by virtue of the capabilities that are available to them now.
Correct. And so there are other variations on those themes that they may be able to offer a healthcare company, for example. They may be able to extend the reach of that healthcare operator, so provide them region-wide communication. They may be able to do that for transit authorities as the communication link goes between, whether it's railway or small airways, or even some connections to the larger ones. Those certainly are the transit authorities for the tollways and roadways that may go through your particular region. So there are many now sub variations of that where you could do, for say, an industry target to a specific application.
Sure. And actually, just related to that, and I know we didn't talk about this before, but I just got this idea. There is an initiative by the NTCA called the Smart Rural Communities, where they're combining requirements from rural operators and rural utilities and some other maybe education institutes to create a smart community. I don't know if that's something that you've been involved in as BTI, or that you're aware of, but I just thought I'll throw it out there because that's a recent initiative from the NTCA. And it's okay if there's no information on it, but if you do, then it'd be great to hear a little bit on that.
So for something where BTI would do that, that would be, for example, the Internet of Things. You're talking about smart cities or smart communities, where they would be, for example, having their traffic cameras. Maybe there are billboards that are on the highways that give you information about whether it's construction or perhaps an accident that's further ahead. Or maybe they want to promote the fact that over Memorial Day weekend here in the US, that they want you to go watching out for drunk driving. So those types of applications, they may be able to participate they would be the provider of the communication links that are between those sites where they might have rights of way down in the median strips of the highway. You then as a service operator would be able to connect those communities together. For example, if you have one of the throughways that goes for all the way through your state or a big section of your county, you may be able to participate as that service provider in that community.
That's fantastic. So that's a pretty good overview of various things that the emerging operators are doing and how they're moving to new spaces. So let's just kind of fold it back, to the workshop that we're actually building up to. So one of the things that, of course, good for folks to understand is, why is BTI participating in the Carry Ethernet for the Cloud Age workshop? What prompted your participation in this?
Well, I think the applications that it's offering, and it's a way to get the education materials to an audience where you may be going to a big telecom event in Chicago anyway. And this is a way to bring in people who have some very focused and specific questions in mind and have a really active interchange of information. There might be other providers that you could learn something from, and certainly as a way for BTI to contribute that and bring some of that together as far as a learning environment. But also it's always interesting to talk to customers about new applications that they may have that we necessarily hadn't thought of. So certainly as a way to exchange ideas and get certainly an application out there like a carrier Ethernet environment and have a good discussion with some of the active providers in that environment.
Yeah, that's great. And that's kind of one of the goals of the workshop. We're trying to keep it small and interactive where, the attendees and the panelists are really going to take away something from the exercise. And as an attendee, you can not just listen to the panelists, but really interact with your colleagues and peers and discuss problems that you're working on right now, this minute, and that you anticipate working on, in the foreseeable future, later this year and early next year. And so I guess in closing, one of the things is, how can the operators and even the ecosystem players, we're going to have vendors and software providers there, how can they benefit from being present at such an event? And what kind of a sort of philosophy or attitude do you think they should come with to get the maximum value out of an interactive workshop like this?
Well, I think up front to think about the types of new services that they may like to offer and questions where you say, we don't have experience in this area, but we're thinking we'd like to add a new service type. Perhaps there'd be somebody in the community that would be a part of the event that may have had some experience with that particular type of application. They may think of, oh, this worked terrific, or oh, we had issues with this, and just bring ideas and things and questions. I think going in with a set of questions that I would like to get this out of a type of event where I'd like to be exposed to some new ideas, or I have some existing problems that I think I could use some interaction with. So coming with a set of questions, call it an agenda, where you can actually get something out of the speakers and what their knowledge is, but also to exchange information with your peers that may be in the audience themselves at the lunches or breaks. Those things are really invaluable.
Fantastic, fantastic. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. So that's great, Amy. It's been a wonderful experience having this discussion with you, and I think there's a lot of learning that the audience who's going to view it up, later on can get out of this. Because both from whether you're a provider or you're somebody who's working in the ecosystem, it's a good way to kind of understand what the needs are, or at least get a preview of that. So again, I wanted to thank you on behalf of myself and the Carry Ethernet group, and of course, my colleagues at Light Reading, for doing this, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at the actual workshop.
Excellent. Thank you, and thank you for having me. We look forward to seeing you all there.
All righty, you take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.